goes ever on and on, down from the door where it began. Now far ahead the road has gone, and I must follow if I can.
Hello everyone, it's Brian. Today is the first of our videos in the Middle-earth Ranger series. Now I wanted to start with the first of the skills that is really mentioned that Aragorn has, and it's how we meet him initially. Now it's not the first time the book mentions him. If you are reading through the book and you're in the chapter 2 is where you first have him mentioned, right? The Shadows of the Past. Gandalf mentions his friend Aragorn, the greatest huntsman of this age. That's the first time he's mentioned. But we're going to talk about the first time that we actually meet him. And the skill that's discussed here is stealth and camouflage. So let's start off with reading a passage from the book, and then we'll kind of delve into the skills. So the first time we actually see Aragorn is in the chapter at the sign of the Prancing Pony. This is after the hobbits have their discussion with Harry the Gateguard, and after they go through, we see this section here. It says, "The man stared after the hobbits for a moment," that's Harry the Gateguard, "and then he went back to his house. As soon as his back was turned, a dark figure climbed quickly in over the gate and melted into the shadows of the village street." That's our very first sighting of Aragorn. So next, let's look at that passage from Aragorn's perspective. This is in the next chapter of the book called Strider, and he's talking to Frodo. And he says these words, "I have quick ears," he went on, lowering his voice, "and though I cannot disappear, I've hunted many wild and wary things, and I can usually avoid being seen if I wish. Now I was behind the hedge this evening, on the road west of Bree, when 4 hobbits came out of the downlands. I need not repeat all that they said to old Bombadil or to one another, but one thing interested me," and then he goes on to recount the conversation that they had with Tom Bombadil. And then it says, "I slipped over the gate just behind them." So we now have confirmation that that is the character that slipped over the gate, that it was Aragorn. Now there are many references to stealth and camouflage as we go through the books as it relates to a ranger. And if you are a huntsman, especially if you are working alone in the wilderness, it's a very, very useful skill. So let's talk about some of the practical things that you would need to know about that in order to accomplish that. So first, let's break down what we're talking about when we are meaning stealth and concealment. And there's two aspects of it. The first is concealment from sight, not being visually seen, and the second is sound discipline, not being heard. Because if you can't be seen but you can be heard, then obviously that's going to give you away, and vice versa. If you're completely silent but you're very visually obvious, then you're going to be seen. So you have to have both of those disciplines in order to be able to move through the forest quietly. Now let's address the concealment issue first. We know from the chapter where the Fellowship is getting ready to leave Rivendell that Aragorn was clad in rusty greens and browns as a ranger of the wild. So clearly, if you're going to be in the forest, earth tones, greens, browns, grays, things like that are going to be the most useful for hiding. But it's more than just wearing camouflage. There are other aspects that go into being concealed from sight. So once you've seen your color, you also want to make sure that you're not wearing anything that has a shine to it. And some of that has to do with the fabrics that you wear. If you're wearing like a natural woolen fabric, it's not going to have shine to it just because of the texture. But if you see my brown shirt that I'm wearing, this is actually made from a bed sheet. And I've had this shirt for a long time, but you can see as it catches the sunlight, that it actually has some gloss to it. So I'm looking to replace this shirt. I actually have some green linen fabric that I'm going to make another shirt, and there'll be a video on that in the future. But it's not just enough to have the right colors. You also need to have good textures that don't reflect the light. But that also refers to things like my belt buckle. You know, I have a brass belt buckle. Ideally, I would either replace that or I would darken that. And that's, again, another project for a future video. The other thing that you need to look at is breaking up your outline. You know, the human eye is very good at picking out shapes, right? So breaking up the outline of the body, you know, using a ghillie suit like modern militaries use, or using a cloak. So a cloak is a very good tool to do that. The hood as well. If I were to wrap this around me and crouch down, it would definitely break up my very distinctive human outline. And also wearing patterns that don't necessarily follow all the same lines, breaking that up like a tiger's stripes or something like that. Once you've covered what you're wearing, it's a lot about how you're moving. You want to use your surroundings to break sight lines. If you're trying to move towards somebody, you want to have natural obstructions as much as possible, whether it be undergrowth, trees, boulders, whatever it is. You definitely don't want to ever silhouette yourself. This is something they talk about a lot in military manuals. You never want to walk on the top of the crest of a ridge because you're silhouetted with the sky behind you. You don't want to silhouette yourself with the sky. If there's a clearing, you don't want to silhouette yourself against the clearing because that's a lighter area and you're going to stand out very distinctly. Water, anything like that. So you have to be aware of what's behind you. And if there is something behind you, sometimes it's better to be in front of a tree than behind the tree because it's going to be breaking up your silhouette. And the last thing is really to be where people aren't looking, where they don't expect. I have very early memories of looking through old Boy Scout manuals, and they were talking about stalking and tracking. And a lot of it was, you know, if you're going to look out around a tree, don't look around at head height, crouch down and look around at the ground. Be where people don't look. People commonly don't look down and they don't look up, which is why modern hunters use tree stands up in the tree, because in addition to people, most animals also don't spend a whole lot of time looking up. Now that we've talked a little bit about concealment from sight, let's talk about sound. And again, we start with our clothing. You really want to rattle-proof your gear. Now, if you're looking at what you're wearing here, and this is something that I did in the service, you know, before we would go on a patrol, you'd always put your gear on and you would jump and you would move around and make sure there wasn't anything that was clinking or loose. And you're never going to be completely silent if you're very, very active, but you don't want anything that's clattering around. So for me, like I have a horn here. I have to make sure that that horn is not tapping against anything hard and making a very distinctive, very loud sound, right? So you start with your gear. You soundproof your gear. You know, you wrap things, you get rid of things, you pack things differently. The way you pack your bags, you want to make sure that there's nothing hard inside of like your cooking pot that could clink against it. So you're wrapping things in fabric before you store them inside of something that's hard. So you, from the ground up, you're looking at that. Also, what's going to play a large factor into your silence of your movement is your footgear. We know that Aragorn wore tall, soft leather boots. Now, I have a couple of different types of boots that I wear. First are these right here. And these are some old leather work boots that I took the rubber soles off of and I glued a set of veg tan leather soles onto the bottom of them. And these work great. They're very flat. I can really feel the ground. I'm wearing them right now and I'm standing on an acorn, so I can tell that I don't need to put my weight down. The others are these, which are just all soft leather moccasins that I made. Both of these really fill that soft footwear niche very, very well. Now the moccasins have a softer sole, so obviously it's much easier to feel what you're walking on. But it's not just enough to have soft soles. If you're not careful with how you walk, you're still going to be stepping on sticks and breaking things. So walking quietly in the forest is very tricky because there's a lot of debris, but a lot of it is about balance and how you walk. Now, I'm not going to do a full video on the fox walk, which is I first heard from, I don't know if he came up with the term, but I first heard of this from Tom Brown's books on nature observation, you know, talking about walking and landing with the ball of your foot and making sure that there's nothing under your foot before you transfer your weight into it. If you've ever watched somebody do like the Tai Chi short forms or long forms, a lot of the way they move, they'll put their foot down and then they'll transfer their weight to it. It's the same basic principle. You want to make sure that you're aware of what your feet are doing, and you always want to be in balance. I was reminded of this a couple of months ago. I was watching a heron move through the water, and if you watch a heron, it's always in balance. It never transfers its weight to a foot until it's sure of its footing. So move like a heron, move like a fox. And if you're combining that visual aspect of the concealment with the sound discipline and the careful movement, then you're on your way to getting good at stalking things like Aragorn was. So thank you everybody for taking the time to watch this. I'm looking forward to more videos in the future as we kind of explore this, and the dogs are looking forward to it too, apparently. And hopefully some of these I'll actually get to go into the forest and do some demonstration of different techniques and things. So until next time, again, thank you for watching, and we'll see you again soon.